It was nice, and then everyone started talking about it. We went back and watched a few more movies. You thought Clint Eastwood was calm, wise, and untouchable, but you were incorrect. The icon eventually took off his mask at 95, showing a side that was darker than anyone could have imagined. He's recognizing 6 stars who let him down when he needed them the most. They stood by him in fame and glory, and then they stabbed him in the back. And once you hear their names, you'll know why Clint Eastwood never forgave or forgot. The first is Leonardo DiCaprio, the golden boy. Clint Eastwood never let it go. What might make Clint Eastwood leave his own movie set? Leonardo DiCaprio is the answer. Everyone believed it was a great pairing when J. Edgar started filming in 2010. The calmest director in Hollywood and the most impassioned performer. But many who were there say it became a quiet horror. DiCaprio brought folders of notes, pages of historical study, and even marked up FBI memos from the start. Crew members stated Clint lost his temper quickly. He acted like a detective trying to figure me out. It was said that Clint made a joke once, but that wasn't the case. There was anger behind the laughter, and it was becoming worse. Then came the scene where the emotional collapse happened. Leo got it right the first time. Real, raw, and perfect. The room stopped moving. Perfect, Clint said quietly. Stop. But Leo wanted more and more. Clint wasn't behind the camera anymore by the 6th. He was leaning on the craft table with a cup of coffee in his hand and a blank look on his face. Someone asked if he was all right. He merely said, "He's still looking for something I already found." There was only silence when the filming was over. The kind of silence Clint likes. After that, casting meetings went the same way. The name DiCaprio came up. Clint shook his head. He'd say, "Great actor, but not my type." They haven't seen each other again, been on stage together, or talked to each other since. Leo earned his Oscar years later, but Clint never called him again. Clint doesn't think that doing it again is what makes it perfect. It's about doing it once and not wasting any more time. The second person is Michael Moore, the man who went too far with Clint. When Michael Moore said that Clint Eastwood's American Sniper was like Nazi propaganda, it was like he pulled the trigger on a friendship that never happened. Clint stood there but didn't shout. He basically left him alone forever. This wasn't the first time they had a fight. The tension had been building since 2005, when Eastwood hissed on stage at the National Board of Review Awards, "If Michael Moore ever shows up at my door with a camera, I'll kill him." People in the room laughed uneasily. Clint didn't. He walked off stage without looking back. That wasn't funny. It was a line in the sand. You need to grasp what Clint stands for in order to understand the resentment, discipline, old school honor, and quiet duty. He thought Moore's documentaries, notably Fahrenheit 9/11, were just a way for him to show off and make politics look like art. He thinks of soldiers like pieces on a chessboard. In a rare moment of anger, Eastwood told a buddy, "I see them as heroes." It was about respect. Then, over 10 years later, Moore made fun of American Sniper online, saying it was like the Nazi sniper movie and Inglourious Bastards. He maintained it was simply a joke, but Clint's people said he was quite angry. One longtime collaborator said, "He doesn't forget insults, he gets rid of them," and that's what he did. Moore's name hasn't come up in Clint's life since that tweet. Eastwood has worked with both liberals and conservatives, but he won't deal with anyone who makes fun of soldiers. He thought Moore not only crossed it, but also spit on it. If you bring up Michael Moore in front of Clint today, the conversation stops. Barbra Streisand, the perfectionist who made the cowboy angry, is number 3. Barbra Streisand is the one name that still makes Clint Eastwood's jaw tighten after 9 decades in Hollywood. He still won't say her name in interviews because she got under his skin so profoundly, and their fight turned into one of Hollywood's coldest battles. It began in the early 1980s when both of them were making the switch from acting to directing. Streisand was the queen of power. It can take 40, 50, or even 60 tries to get one expression. Clint did the opposite. Take 2, then move on. He used to say, "If it's not real the first time, it's not worth filming." Barbra was everything he thought was wrong with the new Hollywood. Control, pride, and thinking too much all the time. By the early 1990s, their innovative ideas had transformed into open hatred. Eastwood was heard advising a friend that maybe Streisand should make decisions faster so she could finish more than 3 movies in 15 years when The Prince of Tides didn't garner her a Best Director nod in 1992. It spread through the business like a fire. Then came the bridges of Madison County, which disrupted what little peace was left. Streisand was going to direct it, but after years of not being able to decide, he dropped out. Eastwood came in, changed the writing, and made a quiet, moving work of art. It got Meyer Street an Oscar nomination and Clint his revenge without saying a word. They haven't talked to each other at all since then. For Clint, she represented everything he hated about creating movies, being unsure, being in charge, and losing his instincts. You only pull the trigger once in his code, not 50 times. Number 4. Tommy Lee Jones, the alpha Clint couldn't control. Tommy Lee Jones came to the set of In the Line of Fire on the first day. In 1993, Clint Eastwood is said to have leaned over to a crew member and said, "Two bulls in one pen, this won't last long." He was correct. At first, everyone thought they would be great together, but behind the scenes, they were fighting. Jones wasn't the kind of person who would follow quiet orders. He yelled, fought, rewrote lines, and kept performing long after the word cut. Clint, who ran his setups quietly, calmly, and effectively, couldn't believe what he saw. One technician remembered that he would stay in character between takes. Clint would just look at you and say, "What are you doing?" The most tense part was when there was a heated argument. Jones towered over Clint, fully in character, spitting every sentence with hatred. "Cut," the director cried. But Jones continued going, staring Eastwood right in the eyes. The crew stopped. Clint murmured to his assistant after a long pause, "That kind of theater isn't worth it." After that, he left the set. At that point, the choice was made. Clint didn't think twice when casting directors later suggested Jones for Eastwood's upcoming films. He would add, "He's a great actor, but we don't speak the same language. Never again." In other words, they've never met up again, never been on a panel together, and never even talked about each other in interviews. Eastwood thinks there can only be one alpha, and he's the one who says cut. Number 5 is Richard Burton, the drinker who drove Clint Eastwood to the verge of his patience. Clint Eastwood doesn't get angry easily, but Richard Burton almost did. On the 1968 set of Where Eagles Dare, the friction wasn't about ego or fame. It was about having a good work ethic. Burton came late, garbled his words, and occasionally smelled like he had been out the night before. Clint, who was fully dressed and ready at morning, just stood there and watched him mess up take after take. One crew member said that Clint's face looked like it was losing respect like water. Burton was in the throes of a turbulent marriage to Elizabeth Taylor, and every night he went to a pub. The staff paid for it every morning. Clint didn't yell or give a speech. He stood there, chilly, quiet, and getting more and more disgusted. Clint apparently said, "I'm getting paid by the picture, not by the hour," when Burton said the same thing for the 10th time. The team chuckled uneasily, but Burton didn't. The message got across. Burton's comment to Eastwood that the movie was a paycheck job was the last straw. That hurt. He thought that every movie, especially an action movie, merited undivided attention. When Clint was asked about Burton years later, he didn't hold back. "A guy with a lot of talent. Talent that was wasted." That was everything he said and everything he needed to say. The movie did well, but their romance ended on sight. Clint never worked with him again and never talked about him again. Burton's fate was sealed for a man who thinks silence is the best weapon. That's not okay. Number 6 is Jean Seberg, the woman who drove Clint crazy. These days, Clint Eastwood doesn't talk about Paint Your Wagon. Jean Seberg is the solution to the question. In the 1969 musical, she wasn't merely his co-star. He promised himself that he would never mix pity and work again because of her. Seberg was weak, unreliable, and already being watched by the FBI because of her political activities. Her feelings were all over the place on stage. One day, she'd win over the team with a smile. Then, for hours, she'd shut herself in her trailer. Clint was the other way around. Focused, on time, and not into drama. He'd had enough by the 3rd week. She would pause in the middle of a scenario to wonder why she was doing it. A script supervisor remembered. Clint would just look at the floor and wait for her to finish. You could tell he was dying inside. The major damage happened later when Paint Your Wagon failed. Seberg told the press that Clint's wooden acting made the movie worse. He thought it was the worst form of betrayal to publicly criticize a co-worker after he'd worked for months to keep the production on track. She was done from that point on. He never spoke her name again. He would change the subject, light a cigar, and walk away if anyone brought her up. When word of Seberg's untimely death in 1979 came out, Clint sat quiet for years. Friends say he appeared really unhappy, yet he never changed. He once observed quietly, "Some people aren't cut out for the work, and I don't want to deal with it twice." That's the closest he's ever got to forgiving someone. What do you think? Did Clint Eastwood do the right thing by cutting them out of his life, or did he go too far by not saying anything? Please tell us what you think in the comments.